Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Tower Babble podcast. As always, I'm Julian Mush. I'm joined by Daniel D'Souza.
What's up?
And Jeremy Cozier.
Hello.
And we are here today to talk about the latest in film and television news. If you are new to the show, welcome. And for those who are returning, thanks for coming back. And the big stories this week are David Fincher signing a 4-year deal with Netflix. We also have more Snyder Cut news because there's always more Snyder Cut news. And Wonder Woman 1984 is coming to HBO Max. So that's pretty crazy. Before we get into that, I'll just remind everyone to follow us on Twitter at TowerBabbleCast, Facebook.com/TowerBabbleCast, and head over to our website, TowerBabble.ca or TowerBabblePodcast.com. Either one will get you there to find everything that we do, including if you're subscribed to this feed, you're getting it anyway. But we are doing weekly recaps of The Mandalorian with Daniel as well as another one of our co-hosts, Rachel. It's been really, really fun. One might argue they've been a little long. We're working on that. But we release those every Monday when we record live every Sunday evening. So keep an eye on that. That's where by the way, this is also live. I don't know if you guys know. If you want to interact with the show, you can. Just keep an eye on those social media feeds. You'll get an alert when we do go live. And if you follow us on Twitch or YouTube or any of those places, you'll get those same alerts. The one last thing I would say before we get going, Dan, is to help support the show. We ask that our fans go to patreon.com/TowerBabbleCast, and for as little as $5 a month, again, keep the lights on, but also get some bonus content. And we're doing monthly film clubs. That's what we've chosen to do. And this month, Dan, what is the movie?
This month we're watching Coherence, another one of my choices. It's a really
weird
really
how that
sweet,
keeps happening.
low budget sci-fi movie. I'm a big fan of this movie. It's a great example of creativity thriving through limitations. You know that famous saying,
right,
or adage. So it's essentially it's a
Wayne
very
Gretzky,
creative,
I believe, who said that.
Is that
that's right. That's right.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about without spoiling, like most sci-fi. So it's join us, watch it, and we'll talk about it afterwards.
Yeah. And if you are a patron. That's the one I'm looking for. You can send us in emails to towerbabblepodcast@gmail.com. In fact, anyone can send us emails into there. But specifically for the movie club, we are looking for thoughts and comments. So please send those in. Okay, so let's start with the most important news of the day, which is, of course, that Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson are developing a sequel to Wedding Crashers. Dan, I turn to you. We go to our correspondent in the field. Dan, can we get live comments?
I love it. I guess.
Do you?
I'm interested to understand what the story could possibly be. Like that one,
right.
the first movie was kind of wrapped up pretty nicely.
It's obvious. Then they have to go back and crash one last wedding.
Yeah, like something along those lines. Like
right.
They have to sneak people into a wedding and they're the experts at it.
Or maybe they're getting married.
Yeah.
Right.
And their wedding gets crashed.
Right.
Something along those lines. Either way, I love the first one, and to get as long as the cast is back together, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Jeremy, what do you think for a sequel to that classic film?
Yeah, I don't know how I don't think I have a prediction on how the story elements would come together, but obviously huge fan of the first one, so but yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Like I don't know if I need another one.
Right.
In terms of it making sense, but yeah, we'll see, I guess.
It is weird. It's like, why now? Why? What is it, like 10, 15 years later?
I don't know. I guess maybe it's something in their personal lives. That's usually how that stuff works out, maybe, right?
Yeah.
If they're in a new chapter and they want to explore that using those existing characters or tropes. I mean, they've changed probably. We know those actors have changed a lot since then. Vince Vaughn has done a lot of different work since, like a variety of different work. There's one crazy one that stands out. I haven't seen it, but people tell me about it. It's like Escape from Cell Block something, and it's like there's like scalpings and crazy shit goes on in that. I mean, that's obviously that, along with he also did season 2 of True Detective, a bunch of other more drama work. Less so from Owen Wilson. You haven't seen much drama work from him.
He's done his fair share.
Yeah.
Remember, he was in Behind Enemy Lines.
I don't remember that.
Enemy Behind Lines.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to see what they do with it. I mean, this is really early on. We'll see. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, can you really capture lightning in a bottle multiple times? There's a comment, I didn't include it in the show notes, but there's someone was talking about this idea of trying to remake Home Alone.
Right.
And it's like, why would you even try? Like, that's like, it's such a iconic film in and of itself, and to try to capture lightning in a bottle again is basically impossible. So it's like, in one way, I like Home Alone 2 for instance, but like to remake it to retell the same story again, I don't know if you need to do that. Like that movie's already good. I think that basically what I'm getting at is for this movie, it's like they obviously think there's a good enough reason to do it. Otherwise,
and presumably not telling the same story, right?
Presumably, yeah. I mean, have you seen Dumb and Dumber 2? No. Jeremy, have you?
Yeah, I have.
And what did you think of? Like, I mean, obviously, we're all huge fans of Dumb and Dumber. What did you think of Dumb and Dumber 2? I liked it, but it's like it doesn't leave any lasting, effect on me.
Yeah, it's not very like memorable. It was just so far after the fact, and it was just so cool that those two actors were able to come back and do another one.
It was more about like hanging out with the character. For me, it was more about like hanging out with the characters again. So maybe that's kind of along the same lines. Same characters, same actors.
Well, and having the same characters is fine. It's as long as they don't fall into the pitfall of
like
having
jokes.
telling the same jokes, a 2020 version of the same story, or same jokes.
Yeah, and I don't think you could get away with it anyway, because it's
Hopefully
like
not.
I don't think those jokes. I mean, I'm sure they age fine, but it's like they probably feel a little dated if you try to use them again in 2022, like they were fresh material. I don't know. Okay. Moving on to the real top story, which is Wonder Woman 1984 is coming to HBO Max for no extra charge. This is different than what they did with
same
Mulan.
day as theaters, right?
Same day as theaters on December 25th. It will premiere in theaters where it can. Obviously, theaters aren't open everywhere. So Patty Jenkins had a statement. Both Patty Jenkins and Wonder Woman herself, Gal Gadot, also had a statement. I just pulled the one from Patty Jenkins. I'll read it now. The time has come. At some point, you have to choose to share any love and joy you have to give over everything else. We love our movie as we love our fans. So we truly hope that our film brings a little bit of joy and reprieve to all of you this holiday season. Watch it in theaters where it is made safe to do so. Check out the great work theaters have done to make it so. And available in the safety of your home on HBO Max, where it is on. Happy holidays to all of you. We hope you enjoy our film as much as we enjoyed making it. So this is actually a huge deal. They've said time and time again that they wanted Wonder Woman 1984 to come out in theaters. They felt it was a movie designed for theaters. Releasing a movie like this day and date on streaming is maybe another nail in the coffin of the theater industry. As much as I'm excited, I've been wanting to watch Wonder Woman 1984 since the first movie, but ever since that amazing first trailer, basically a perfect trailer, I've been really excited for this movie, and I really wanted to see it in theaters. So there's a couple things to this for me. What are you guys' thoughts on its impact on the theater-going experience in the industry? Also, this idea of not being able to see it in theaters, be able to watching these big movies, designed for theaters in some cases, most cases, being released on home video first or at day and date. What do you guys feel about that?
Jeremy?
Jeremy?
All right. I don't know. I just see this as a pretty bold strategy. I like how you just have the option, right? Like they're just finally going to release this thing, and you have the option either or, and it just so happens to be on a day where basically everyone's going to be at home, right? So I think it's more of a move to get subscribers to HBO Max, get everybody on board with that. I've seen reports that Warner Brothers and AT&T really want to get their subscriber rates up for HBO Max, especially in seeing how Disney Plus is around 80 million subscribers, and I think HBO Max is like 20 but they have like 8 million active users, so it's pretty low in comparison. So I just see it as a pretty bold move to kind of swallow the supposed success that Wonder Woman would have garnered from a full theater release, but just because the times we're in, I think it'd be too long of a wait to just keep pushing this movie.
It's already been pushed like a full year. I like at least a full year. Yeah, maybe two almost. Like it's been a long time. Yeah. Dan, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, it's enough is enough. It's been pushed a
The
million
time
times.
has come. Is that what you're saying?
It is. It's bittersweet. I think, obviously excited to see the movie. Cool.
Right.
I appreciate that it's being made available in a safe format for people. Like that's all great. But it is, like you said, it's not good news for theaters. It's probably not good news for the movie itself in terms of ROI. Like,
no, they'll definitely lose money on this.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but I mean, it's one of those kind of sunk cost things. Where it's like the money's already spent. It's
Fair
like
enough.
get anything back is better than nothing.
It's just a little. And maybe this is me being pessimistic, but it's a little depressing because it's just an example of more long-term thinking, like COVID being a longer, more prevalent part of our lives.
Do you think
for a
they
long
know
time.
something that we don't?
Not necessarily. It's more that they're getting used to, like, their mentality. They're getting used to the idea that there is again, the term new normal gets thrown around all the time nowadays, but that's what this is. The fact that movies can come out on streaming and still get to people changes the whole dynamic.
Well, yeah, it's one of those interesting things where people have been saying, "Hey, theaters are dying, and it's streaming services that are doing it. That's what's killing it." And I don't agree that that's what's happening here. I think it's kind of a symptom of the fact that theaters are dying. So you have people going to streaming. In fact, now we have studios going to streaming as a solution to not enough people going to theaters or not having the option to. Ultimately, I think it's COVID that's killing theaters, not streaming services.
Yeah,
it's kind of
in
the
this
takeaway.
case, at least. Although streaming services were doing their damage beforehand.
Yeah, they were, but I think all things being equal, and COVID didn't exist, I think we would have found a happy medium, probably. There's still a chance that we will. There's a fly. I got it. No, I didn't get it. Damn it. There's still a chance that we'll find that happy medium, but I'm very concerned. Is my thoughts on this, and it just tampers so much my excitement for Wonder Woman 1984.
Yeah.
I will on Christmas Day be very stoked to sit down and watch that movie.
Yeah,
for sure. But right now, it's like you said, bittersweet. I don't know.
And I think, unfortunately, it's going to slightly, to varying degrees for different people, cheapen the experience.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, like, we are fortunate. We have this big, nice TV behind us.
Yeah.
Right. Surround sound system. Lots of options. Right. We have, it's a 4K television, so we could watch it in that. Although HBO Max, here's one thing that people were like really hoping for: is HBO Max is not in 4K.
Right.
They're hoping that say, hey, if you're going to release Wonder Woman 1984 on home theater, then like let us actually try to replicate the theaters as best we can. We can't if we can't get 4K. So that's a little upsetting. I don't know if they support HDR even, which is another big thing. If you're not making stuff in HDR, and I think you can, if you have an HDR television and you're on Netflix and you watch HDR content, you can see the difference. It would be a big loss, I think. Disney Plus definitely. Mulan is a movie designed for HDR. We'll just put it that way. But we'll see. And I think Wonder Woman 1984 looks like a movie. Lots of bright colors would look really good on those kind of televisions, and it might soften that blow of the death of the movies. Okay. Any final thoughts on that? I guess we'll just wait to see. At this point, we're only less than a month away, or just over a month away from seeing it. So time will tell, I guess. Okay. So going from, I guess, another kind of a little bit of a down. I don't know how to describe it. Like you said, mixed bag maybe as a good way to describe it. Disney reports its first annual loss in over 40 years. It's pretty crazy. Suffering a loss of over $5 billion in revenue as a direct result of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So we don't normally talk about this kind of stuff.
Right.
But I wanted to bring it up here because I think it's a cautionary tale a little bit. Disney, over the last 40 years, where they've been making money hand over fist, have bought up a lot of Hollywood.
Sure.
So when they don't make money, when Disney doesn't make money, it affects a huge swath of the entertainment industry, like a massive piece of it.
For sure.
So the more that they own, the more at risk you are of something like this knocking the whole thing over, toppling the house of cards.
Right.
Right. So, just pointing that out there. That's like, hey, everyone was excited when Marvel bought or when Disney bought Fox so that the X-Men could join the MCU. But it's like there's bigger repercussions there, And this is kind of an example of what could happen if they kept losing money.
It's crazy how these things work, and it's just like this in in any industry, really.
Right.
It's almost like they're too big to fail.
Well, yeah, basically. So according to company's November 12th quarterly report, Disney's fourth quarter losses totaled $710 million, which is actually not that much for a company like Disney, which led the company to suffer its second consecutive red quarter. Prior to 2020, Disney had not reported a quarterly loss since 2001. That's insane. When the company ceased operation of the internet search portal Go.com, which I didn't know they owned, and had not seen back-to-back quarterly losses since 1996. Disney also reported an annual grand total loss of $2.83 billion in losses, which is a much larger number, obviously, but also an annual number, which marks the first time the company has marked an annual loss since 1980.
Damn. So
just to give you some context about what those numbers are. Just, again, caution when you're getting excited about those acquisitions, Look at we can just, again, look to Warner Brothers and what happened when AT&T bought them. There are ripples to those decisions.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. Moving on. Chris Nolan is shocked. I love this story, for the record. I'm absolutely, it tickles me. Chris Nolan is shocked when people complain about the sound in his movies. He says, I'm going to paraphrase this because I didn't put the quote, but he's basically saying that he's gotten calls from other filmmakers and they're like, "Hey, I saw your movie, couldn't understand the dialogue," and he's like, in this most recent interview, he's like, "You know what? I've been getting these this feedback, and you know what? I think it's all bullshit." Basically, he's like, "I'm pioneering new sound technology. I'm doing new cool stuff that people aren't doing with sound." It's like, well, that's all fine and good, but if you can't understand what people are saying, I guess it doesn't really matter. But I just think it's so funny that he's gotten this feedback in the past and then it chose to double down on it. I don't know. What do you guys think of this? I think it's a great story.
He makes his movies his way. He's kind of always been like that. That doesn't apply just to the sound techniques, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of auteur directors are probably not open to criticisms as open to criticism.
Right. Jeremy, what do you think of this as a resident, probably biggest Nolan fan?
Well, I think it's weird that he's shocked since he's been kind of dealing with this for a while,
since at least Dark Knight, for sure.
Right, where he learned of it through test audiences, and then they had to redo some of Bane's dialogue. So I guess maybe he attributed that to Bane's muffled voice, but yeah, I think it's pretty clear in his latest movie that it's definitely hard to understand certain pieces of dialogue.
There's one scene in particular that's basically impossible to understand what people are saying without subtitles. So,
but it's also because the music is so loud.
Well, it's the mix, right? So he's saying that hey, these movies are designed to be listened to in these theaters where the sound, all the sound engineering is perfect and all this stuff. But I saw Tenet in theaters and it was still unintelligible for parts of it. So his movies are very loud. We'll put it that way. But he likes, for some reason, to mix the sound of either the ambient environments or music, the score, especially the score, really high in comparison to dialogue, just compared to most movies. And again, to him, he's just pioneering a new thing. He's just blazing his own trail. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Kind of, a little bit with that stuff, especially.
Well, I think it works for take a movie like Dunkirk where there's very little dialogue. I think that works wonderfully, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not going to apply to every single movie, especially when you need to tell a narrative.
Right. Okay. Dan Trachtenberg, you guys will recognize him as the director of 10 Cloverfield Lane. He also directed, I think, the first couple episodes of The Boys. Is set to direct a new Predator film for 20th Century Studios, which is I'll have to get used to saying.
Damn.
/ Disney. And apparently it won't touch on any of the stuff that Shane Black's Predator film did from a couple of years ago. I remember, Jeremy, we went to see that movie, and we recorded in the car segment right after, and we were just blown away by how bad that movie was. It was so bad. And Dan Trachtenberg, I think, has been garnering a little bit of a following. I think he's shown that he has some chops. He was originally attached at one point, not originally, but at one point was attached to direct the Uncharted movie, and that fell through. He's kind of comes from our background. He's former podcaster of the Totally Rad Show, and then kind of worked his way up in the film industry. I root for him, let's put it that way. So for a franchise like Predator, which has a lot of prestige, I think, from its first movie, but kind of has struggled to find an audience since. Like, it doesn't know what to do with the franchise. I think giving it to someone like Dan Trachtenberg might be the right call. What do you guys think?
Well, I think I read that it's also not only is it ignoring, but I think it's like a requel. Like, it's overwriting the Shane Black stuff.
Oh, really?
So it's keeping the original, the Arnold Predator, as part of canon, and I think, and maybe probably the Danny Glover one, and then everything else is gone. Is my understanding.
Have you seen Predator 2?
Yeah,
it's a crazy movie.
It's all right.
It's a really weird. I don't think it's a bad movie. I just think it's like it does this like, it's supposed to be set in some like alternate future, right? Or at the time alternate future, because like LA is like completely overrun with like crime and stuff like that, if I recall correctly. And
I don't remember that part. Jeremy would be the expert on
Predator. I don't remember that. I just think the setting is so different.
Yeah.
But they tried to recreate the same feel of the first one, and it just felt kind of odd. But they also revealed more of like the lore of the Predators.
Right. That's when the first time we see the alien skull.
The Xenomorph skull.
Yeah, the Xenomorph skull. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we'll keep an open mind. I'll always check out a new Predator movie.
Sure.
All the way back to that Predators movie with was that Olivia Munn and Nia or Morpheus was in it, I think, also.
Lawrence Fishburne.
Right. Again, these movies are just so forgettable. Like since the first one, basically, maybe the second, which is I think maybe got a little bit of traction since more recently.
I don't think I've ever disliked one. They haven't blown me away. They've just been generic action movies aside from the first one, even the first one to a degree.
I would say the first one wasn't generic. I mean, the first half is generic. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Stephen Capel, I don't know how to say that. Capel Jr. Stephen Capel Jr., the director of Creed 2, amongst other stuff, is set to direct a new Transformers film, which is scheduled for release on June 24th, 2022, and will be set in the Bumblebee universe. Have you guys seen Bumblebee?
No.
It's the best Transformers movie. It's right up there with the original Michael Bay one. The important thing to note here with this new Transformers movie is that Michael Bay will have no creative control whatsoever. Bumblebee basically resets Transformers. It's a reboot. Yeah. In all intents and purposes. The design is different for the characters. They show us Optimus Prime in a hologram, very much like the original G1 design of Optimus. They clearly went back to the drawing board. It is a really good movie. It really touches on that same thing that the original Transformers did well, which is that kind of that relationship between a kid and their car. It's really good, and I would recommend if you like those movies at all, like especially the original Transformers, to go check it out. It's a lot more fun is maybe not the right word. It certainly still is fun, but it takes itself, I think, just the right amount of serious without getting too crazy,
So, given the fact that you're the only one who's seen that movie, is there anything in that movie that sets up a sequel?
Yes. So, I guess quick spoilers for the end of Bumblebee, which came out I don't know how many years ago. But at the end, we find out that Bumblebee's basically on Earth by himself, and that after he took out those two Decepticons, there's two Decepticons he takes out. He gets a message from Optimus saying that they're on their way, or something like that. Basically, that they're out there, and that there's room for sequels.
The cavalry's coming.
Yeah. So, I think Michael Bay still did have some input on Bumblebee. Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see what someone who's I don't know how much of a fan Stephen Capel Jr. is of the original Transformers stuff, but just a different take on this I think will be interesting, especially with those main characters, which we didn't really get in Bumblebee, except for Billy Bumblebee. So, moving on, there was a new trailer for the Tom and Jerry movie. Did anyone see this?
I did not.
No.
It was.
I won't ever.
Did you like Tom and Jerry? That's the first question. Did you guys like Tom and Jerry growing up at all?
I liked it fine growing up, but I'm not interested in a Tom and Jerry movie personally right now.
That's fair. I kind of understand. I think that's kind of their goal. I think is to beat everyone. They know that that's everyone's opinion, and they need to kind of find a way to overcome it. So I think they've done some interesting choices here. I thought the trailer was not bad. It's basically just Tom and Jerry as a movie, but it's in live action. But they're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. So it's they're doing the Jessica, is it Jessica Rabbit? style where you have like 2D animation and a
Roger
3D,
Rabbit.
Roger Rabbit style in the real life, right? And they've got some good names. Who's the guy from Ant-Man that everyone loved?
Paul Rudd?
No, not Paul Rudd. The guy who does like the backstory piece. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't remember.
Anyway, he's in that. He's in it as well. So they're doing some interesting stuff. But it's really, again, it's just like the Tom and Jerry antics in RL, quote unquote. If I can use the kids' language,
I guess you can.
And with some fun like character actors. I think it'll be okay. I think it's gonna be okay, guys. That's my hot take on it.
Thank God.
Yeah. Jeremy, do you have any attachment to Tom and Jerry?
None whatsoever.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, moving on. The Rock is developing. I know you guys have a attachment to The Rock.
Oh, sure.
We all do. Every single person
Every human does.
Yeah. Is developing a reboot for The Scorpion King, which is Daniel's favorite movie of all time, if I recall correctly.
Oh God.
Awesome. Is that awesome?
You know what? No, it's not. It's not. I'm not a huge fan of that movie. I mean, it was a spin-off, right? It was from The Mummy 2, and he was just the throwaway character in The Mummy 2, and then they span up this whole thing. Again, a very generic action movie.
Yep.
I guess it's cool. I'm more a fan of new properties and new ideas, but a reboot to the Scorpion King, cool. Whatever. I mean, it's The Rock in an action movie. It's still gonna be great, right?
Yeah, that's probably.
And it's probably
true.
gonna be so badass now that it's gonna have a crazy budget. That first one was relatively low budget.
I get that one and Achilles confused all the time in my brain. Like they feel very similar to me in like my memory.
You mean the movie Troy?
Troy, yeah. With features Achilles, I think.
It does,
yeah. But yeah, that makes more sense. That would be called Troy. But anyway, those movies get like blended together in my brain. The one thing that sticks out for me for the Scorpion King is his appearance in the Mummy 2, where he looks like a Nintendo 64 character.
Yeah.
It's so funny. If you go back and look at, I mean, like I don't know if there's been a remaster of that movie since it came out or anything, but
collector's edition.
You'd hope that if they did, they would retouch some of those effects. But wow. I liked the Scorpion King when I was a kid. I enjoyed that movie. I probably watched it more than once.
Really?
Yeah.
Explains a lot.
I like The Rock a lot. We watched. That was right when that was like prime when we were into the what's it called? It was the Attitude Era.
Yeah, that's true.
Of WWE, and we were into it.
Yeah.
So
Monday Night Raw.
Yeah. It was like, excuse me, The Rock is in a Mummy movie. I'm in day one, right? Probably couldn't connect those dots really at that time, but you know what I mean. Okay, Dan, this is up your alley. The director of the Mortal Kombat movie, yet unnamed Mortal Kombat movie. Mm-hmm. Todd Garner says he won't have a release date or trailer until theaters reopen, which kind of goes off of the Wonder Woman thing, which might mean we never get a trailer or release date.
Or not for years, right?
Yeah.
So that's disappointing, for sure.
Well, the studio might have other things to say about that. We'll put it that way. I guess the real question here, Dan, is like, or for both you guys, is another Mortal Kombat movie something that you're obviously excited about it?
Yeah, 100%.
And if you're gonna make a Mortal Kombat movie, are you remaking, quote unquote, the first one, the story of the first? It's what they did for the animated movie too, right?
Well,
retell the first tournament.
Maybe, but I just think it's time to really grasp this franchise and do it justice. I mean, I just think it's going to be amazing. Like I can't see how it won't be if it's essentially treated like these huge Marvel superhero movies.
Right. The lore is there for sure. I mean,
the lore is there. The characters are there. Half the writing's there.
The music is there.
The music's always
That's right.
there.
If there's no Skrillex, I'm not in. I'll put it that way. So I don't know if you guys watched any of the Fantastic Beasts movie. I know you guys like the Harry Potter movies, probably more than I did. Mm-hmm. But the Fantastic Beasts movies never appealed to me at all. And I don't know if they just weren't marketed at me or what. I haven't seen them. I've heard they're not very good, but there was 3 of them. There's at least the third one. The third one's in development.
Okay.
And there's been some drama around it. So Johnny Depp has been fired from the film. Without getting into all the drama of that, the replacement that they have in mind It's not confirmed yet, but Mads Mikkelsen is in talks to take over. Listen, I don't know anything about the character of Grindelwald.
And it's the same character?
Yeah, the same character. Recasting.
Those guys look like night and day.
Yeah, but I think with magic you can do anything you want.
It's polyjuice.
Right. Totally. Absolutely.
This guy doesn't know what polyjuice is.
Yeah, sure I do. It probably makes you look like somebody else.
It does. It's a potion that makes you look like somebody. You just need, like, in the second movie, they take the hair from the people, put it in the potion, and they look like them.
Okay, cool. So maybe it's that. I don't know. But I'll tell you what, Mads Mikkelsen plays a good bad guy.
Sure.
So I do know that. I think I do know that he's a bad guy. So I'm all in. More Mads Mikkelsen. I think that guy needs more work. I like him in everything he's in. I've never seen Hannibal, but I've heard it's good. Okay, let's get into the juicy stuff here. Now we got some of the less exciting stuff out of the way. David Fincher has signed a 4-year deal with Netflix. He wants to work with Netflix because apparently Hollywood is only content with making quote-unquote Happy Meal tentpole movies. And this is just above and beyond all the... Oh, man, he's had so many amazing quotes recently, and we're going to touch on some of them here. We don't have to dive deep into them, but I want to mention them just because they tickle me. I think it's great to hear these kind of honest opinions. He's unhinged, it seems like, a little bit. Like he's unleashed onto the world. This new David Fincher, maybe the same one that we don't get to hear from very often. But he signed a 4-year deal with Netflix, and his quote is, "I'm here to deliver them quote-unquote content," whatever that means. So
I don't love that quote.
Yeah. I think he was my guess is that is an answer to a question he wasn't excited about answering.
Right.
Less so, he wouldn't sign the deal if he didn't think he could bring real like film to it. I mean, Mank is not a, quote unquote movie for the 4 quadrants, I would say,
And just to be clear, within that quotation, that's a sub-quote. Like he himself is quoting the word content within the quotation.
Right. Which is hard to convey.
I know.
Yeah. So first of all, what do you guys think of Fincher doing 4 years with Netflix? Based off of his recent comments and some of his attitude and some of the reviews for Mank, I think this is a great time for him to be exploring his kind of more angsty side, it seems like, on a streaming platform where he kind of has, carte blanche.
Yeah, I mean, lean into that energy. I don't know. What do you think, Jeremy?
I don't know if Jeremy can hear. Jeremy, can you hear Daniel?
There's a delay.
Not as good, but
right.
Do I have last time you switched over what I hear through a different speaker, and it was way better.
Sure. Let me see if I can do the same.
But either way, what are your thoughts on David Fincher 4 years with Netflix?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of everything he does, so more content from him, the better. If it's quicker, because I think he said something about that too, right? About how he's kind of off put on how many projects he's done in total by now. I think he wants to do more quicker. So,
and there's a whole lot of red tape in Hollywood that he wants to just get around and just work with Netflix.
Right.
Fair enough. I mean, it's hard to. I haven't seen Mindhunters. I've seen some of his movies, not all of his movies.
I think you just did that. Them. You did that old person thing. You put an S at the end of stuff. Hilarious. It's just a Mindhunter.
Ah, shit. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Man.
That's a sign. That's a sign.
Man,
that's a sign. That's definitely a sign.
Oh, no. It's eye-opening.
You watched the first 30 seconds of Mindhunter when we were trying to decide what to put on in the background. Right. We decided that was not an appropriate thing to put on the background.
We went with Social Network instead. It turns out within the first 10 seconds of Mindhunter, there's a giant wiener on the... Just a regular wiener, but you know what I mean.
Depends on what you're comparing it against, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into some of these, I think, very fun takes that he's had, and maybe I'll save the spicier one for the end. And maybe it's up to you guys what you think is the spiciest of all these takes. So I'll start with the Orson Welles one. I think it's the lightest. In an interview, this is coming from Vanity Fair. In an interview with French Premiere, as caught by the playlist, Fincher advanced the theories of Mank that the authorship of Orson Welles' 1941 masterpiece, Citizen Kane, was more collaborative than some people realize. At 25, you don't know what you don't know. he said of the theater and radio wonder kid who stormed Hollywood. He paraphrased Welles saying, "It only takes an afternoon to learn everything there is to know about cinematography," then called it BS, saying, "Is that the remark of someone who's been that's the remark of someone who's been lucky to have Greg Toland around to prepare his next shot." Basically, there's another piece that kind of shortens it down. He calls him like a juggler and like a, not a hack necessarily, but like a showman. He was more about the yeah.
I think that's been a common criticism of Orson Welles for a while. This isn't anything new.
Right.
The idea is that Mank, the character, I don't remember the guy's name, but that he was really the person writing.
Right.
Citizen Kane.
Right.
Right. And so Orson Welles took. It seems like my understanding of it, at least, is that Orson Welles took a lot of the credit when it was much more, like you said in this quote, collaborative thing,
which is very similar to the Dean Cain, Bob Finger. Is it Dean Cain, I think? Batman story.
Bob Kane, Bill Finger.
Bob Kane and Bill Finger.
Dean Cain played Superman.
Oh, okay. There you go. Okay.
Lois and Clark.
Okay. So that's not who I was thinking of. Anyway, I think it seems like that seemed to happen a lot back then. People just taking other people's credit for their work. I don't know if maybe that's still happening. But that is interesting. I have heard that quote where he says that, it only takes an afternoon to learn everything there is to know about cinematography, which does come off like a little bit like BS.
Of course,
Yeah. Jeremy, what do you think? I mean, I've never actually seen Citizen Kane, but is this something like you went to film school? I'm sure they spent more time discussing Orson Welles than we have ever spent discussing it. What do you think of that?
We didn't really talk too much about it. Like I've never even seen Citizen Kane either, actually. We actually focused more on Alfred Hitchcock.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes more sense, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have anything to say over this.
I mean, I guess that's like that. The further, I guess, the time we go, you're getting more and more people really praising Hitchcock. I mean, he's always had a lot of praise.
Sure.
And then less people seeming to praise Orson Welles, that he was less influential, or he was maybe more influential than he deserved to be, as it would seem.
No,
like.
he was hugely influential. Like War of the Worlds, the radio show, that influenced like people's lives on a deep level.
Well, people literally thought they were being invaded by aliens.
So he was an influential figure. Absolutely, you can't take that away from him. And I would say not necessarily to defend the quote, but when he was saying it, we didn't really study cinematography the way we do now. So for him to say something like that,
so maybe there was only an afternoon's worth of stuff to learn.
It's still reductive, but it's like what he's saying is that he got through it quickly,
right?
And then he made successful movies. So.
Okay. The other quote is on cancel culture. Now, this is actually, I think, interesting. He's intimately familiar, maybe, perhaps, with this. Not as intimate as other people have been, but his show, House of Cards, was affected directly by that when Kevin Spacey was removed from the project. And so he's apparently been thinking about it. And his quote is, "At its heart, he's built." First of all, okay, just give it a little more context. He's thinking of creating a show around it. He wants to make a show about cancel culture, which I think is difficult. But if anyone's going to do it, I feel like Fincher could. And he says again, this quote, "At its heart, it's about how we in modern society measure an apology," he said. "If you give a truly heartfelt apology and no one believes it, did you even apologize at all? It's a troubling idea, but we live in troubling times." What do you guys think of that?
I think that is problematic.
You think it's going to be challenging?
Problematic, yes.
Yeah.
The idea that an apology forgives, that if as long as you are able to deliver a heartfelt apology, all is well. I think that's a problematic way to look at things. So these people, like Kevin Spacey, in this case, like the idea of cancel culture obviously has been exaggerated and exasperated, and there are some people that have been like, it's really hard to talk about this stuff. You have to be very sensitive. People like Kevin Spacey deserved it, is what I'm trying to say. That's like to in shorthand. Kevin Spacey deserved everything that he got. So regardless of how heartfelt his apology is, I still think those actions are unforgivable.
Right. And I don't think he's necessarily trying to defend Kevin Spacey.
No, of course not.
I think what he's trying to do is examine this idea of...
That's a very dangerous way to look at apology, especially in that context of cancel culture.
Well, I think what he's saying is in the context of cancel culture, that and what you're saying is that apology is not enough. That there needs to be repercussions beyond that, or maybe not repercussions, but there needs to that's that society or at least cancel culture, that piece of society doesn't deem, from his opinion, doesn't deem that to be an acceptable response to whatever it is that they're being canceled for. So he's saying, okay, well, that's interesting. I want to explore that. We might be too close to this to be, or like not we specifically, but like we're kind of in cancel culture as a term is really only it's like barely a year old, practically, or maybe couple of years old. It's a very new concept. It might be a little early to start kind of, trying to pick it apart and try to find its flaws when it hasn't even fully formed as a concept. I would say.
I suppose, yeah, and everybody has a different understanding of what it is, a different personal understanding of it. We'll see what yeah. It's an interesting thing to talk about. So a show that explores it could be interesting. I just think that it gotta really thread that line.
It's gonna have to walk.
Mix of metaphors.
It's gonna have to walk a very
walk
thin
the line and thread the needle.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last one. This one I think is the spiciest one. Okay. I took this quote from The Independent, but it's all over the place. He called it, and I'm going to just read from the piece. Speaking about the movie The Joker, he called it a betrayal of the mentally ill. He accused the Todd Phillips film of quote-unquote conflating characters played by Robert De Niro in Martin Scorsese's film Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy for monetary gain. Quote, I don't think anyone would have looked at that material and thought, yeah, let's take Travis Bickle and Rupert Pumpkin and conflate them, then trap them in a betrayal of the mentally ill and trot it out for $1 billion, the director told The Telegraph. He also attributed the film's success to Christopher Nolan's 2008 sequel to The Dark Knight, in which Heath Ledger played the Joker. Nobody would have thought they had a giant hit with the Joker had Dark Knight not been as massive as it was, he added. So, do you think that's a fair critique? I guess what he's trying to say, if I'm paraphrasing it, is that he didn't think that Todd Phillips used a deft hand in exploring that idea.
Essentially what he's saying is that if it weren't Joker, if it weren't that makeup and that DC character, the movie would not be as successful and likely not at all successful.
Right.
So it's taking advantage of that, people with that mental state, and glorifying it, I guess.
And then pasting the character, the Joker, on it, and then trotting it out to make money. I think his and that kind of ties back to what he was saying before, is that he's not interested in working the Hollywood system because they just want to make Happy Meal tentpole movies. And I'm not saying that the Joker is necessarily that, but it's pretty close to that for a drama of that style. It's as close as you'll get. I mean,
when they made it with that low budget, like I generally think that no one knew how much money he was going to make.
Well, yeah, I don't think so. I would agree. I would agree with that. I don't know if I would presume that I don't think that Todd Phillips or Joaquin Phoenix went in thinking, "Well, this is a paycheck movie." I don't think that.
Yeah, they both didn't make it in terms of that tentpole type mentality at all. Right? It was basically the opposite.
Yeah, honestly, it sounds like sour grapes, man.
It feels like
it really does. Like to claim that movie, like, of course Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight was successful. A large part of that was Heath Ledger, and the Joker character has been wildly popular, more so popular since then.
Well, you could even say it's he's become like a mythological character.
Always was, but more so more so in the common, like the current zeitgeist, right? So yes, that is a fact, but still, Todd Phillips wanted to make a completely different movie just because he used the same character. I think that's just a convenient sort of superficial criticism.
Well, and he's been open about it being basically a version of Taxi Driver,
right? Homage,
like from the get go, even having Robert De Niro in the movie.
This seems to me, this quote is, I think, partially only interesting because it's coming from Fincher. I mean, I think most people who have this critique has been levied at this film before.
Sure.
And that, he's saying, well, let's take Travis Bickle and Rupert Pumpkin and put them together or whatever. And he's talking about Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. And the typical, or a lot of the common critiques is that Joker was rote, that it was not doing anything different. It was just borrowing all these ideas from existing properties and then mashing them into this DC character's quote unquote origin story, and it it didn't feel as revelatory as they thought it was, or they thought it could be. I don't have the context of having watched Taxi Driver, and I've never seen Taxi Driver or King of Comedy, so I can't have that context. But it seems to me that if you were someone who grew up with those movies that were made in the 80s and you saw this movie, you might feel that way. I just don't know, you know?
It's a fair point. I think the biggest point in that is the betrayal of the mentally ill, because that movie does to a degree glorify mental illness and in some cases some of the negative aspects of certain types of impairments.
Right.
So it's unhealthy in that sense. Because a lot of people took it the wrong way. That's not the goal of the movie. I think that's an important distinction, and that's why that critique shouldn't land on Todd Phillips' shoulders.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of come down on two sides of it. I think that is a fair critique of the movie. Whether the movie wanted to send that message or not, I don't think is necessarily relevant, because I think if people interpret it that way, I think that's entirely valid. I think.
Maybe that's tough. Because in this case, it's almost the opposite of what the intent was. The movie was not intending to glorify the character at all. It was not intending to make it seem.
I don't know how you can make a movie with character the Joker being the main character without knowingly unintentionally. I think it's hard to say that. It doesn't make any sense. But like by making a movie called Joker and placing that character as the main character, I think inherently create some of those feelings by being the main character.
But that has more to do, getting back to what we had said earlier, that has more to do with the public's relationship with the archetype of the Joker than it does with that movie.
Well,
and the way the movie is presented it's not at all like the character is going through a hard time, and when it's finally revealed, like, you know, how he thought he had that fantasy with the girlfriend. Obviously, spoilers for Joker. I'm sorry. I assume you've seen it by now.
Everyone's seen it. That's what we're talking about. They made a bunch of money.
Like when there's that whole montage of realizing, you know, it was all in his head the entire time. That's not. That's a terrible, terrifying moment for the character and for the audience. You know, it's not a fun, happy.
No, that's certainly not. But I mean, you could I wouldn't argue the best example of that.
Even the way the movie ends, though, I mean, as much as it is triumphant music, and I remember that being a critique of the movie at the time. Like when we talked about it, it kind of ends almost like he wins. The main character wins. But I don't think you have to interpret it that way. And it's still a lot of negative stuff going on within the context of the movie.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, whether you like the Joker or not, I think that it's able to create a discourse around that is probably just for the best anyway, around this stuff. And we just need to have more of those conversations anyway. So, you know, we can definitely talk about what they did or didn't do right in Joker. You know, it's not a perfect movie, but as long as we're talking about it, I think that's a net positive, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on this at all? Additional thoughts? Final thoughts?
No, not really.
Okay. Then we shall move on. This is a quick one, but I want to put this in here because I thought it was a little interesting. So George Lucas recently had a couple interviews. He talked about a couple things. I just put the bulleted versions of them. I didn't take the quotes or anything. He talked about the prequels as well as what his sequels might have looked like for Star Wars.
Okay.
So the first thing on the prequels was revealed that Fox was worried that, quote, he would destroy the franchise, unquote, by centering episode 1 on a 10-year-old boy.
Came close.
Right. All I'm saying is for everything that, everything changes, everything stays the same. I swear to God, the Star Wars fandom has not changed once since 1977. Like, it's crazy to me. And then you mentioned about the sequels, what his would have looked like. And I think there's some interesting ideas here, which is that Darth Maul and his apprentice Talon were going to be the main villains for the trilogy.
So Maul was always meant to survive?
Well, he brought Maul back in Clone Wars. He was involved in that. Yeah. And then Luke would have reunited with 50 to 100 survivors of Order 66 and rebuild the Jedi Order.
Nice.
Okay. And that Leia would have become the Supreme Chancellor, and then she would have been the one who ended up being the chosen one, which is true to his original vision, which he felt that Leia was kind of the main character of the original trilogy. He felt like she was the core of those movies. Whether
I don't think that
really made the movies to make it feel that way is hard to say. This fly is going to drive me insane.
It's not bugging anybody.
It's bugging me. What do you guys think of this? The idea of Darth Maul coming back is kind of, I think, a better full circle moment for as opposed to bringing the Emperor back. Is my opinion. For a final movie, even if it was just like revealed at the end, I don't know if that would still work. It's too many ifs and buts, but I would have been okay with that over what they chose to do with Episode 9. Yeah.
Jeremy, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't really care about this, to be honest.
That's what we bring you here for, Jeremy. Your
Darth Maul. Like,
hot topics.
I don't really I don't know. It just never would have happened, anyways. Like, what's the point?
Well, I mean, not necessarily. I think it's an interesting what if. There's a couple what if scenarios in Hollywood. One of them is if Lucas doesn't sell Lucasfilm to Disney, and eventually, I think probably would have eventually went on to make those movies himself. What would they have been like? And would they have been quote unquote better than what we got? I don't know. There's no way to know that, right?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you that this is certainly more interesting. These concepts, I think, are certainly more interesting than some of the kind of retread ideas that we got, especially in Episode 7, and then whatever the fuck Episode 9 was. There's certainly critiques for Episode 8, but like this idea of bringing back, for instance, the Jedi Order, just rebuilding it instead of what JJ did, which is, hey, we started doing that and then it all fell apart.
Right.
I don't know if that's more interesting. Like I think there is something to be said about this idea of a failed experiment. That the Jedi Order turns out were too. You said too big to fail, but like they had gotten too big and lost their way.
Right.
And that trying to recreate that exact as it was on Coruscant or whatever wouldn't necessarily work. That one might be an interesting concept to explore.
Certainly interesting that there's more than 2 Jedi that survived in Lucas's version.
Right.
I've always thought that was a weird sort of coincidence.
We find out all the time that more Jedi turns out more Jedi survived all the time.
I don't know. Ultimately, like they're cool ideas. Obviously,
right.
we'll never see them in real life. Given what we did receive, I think I probably would have preferred to keep Lucas on Star Wars.
Right. I think what's interesting here is that when Lucas makes these ideas more public, you can then later on see when new creators in Star Wars pull from his previous ideas, which we've seen now a couple times. And he's like, well, it's like, okay, if Talon now ever appears, I think she's appeared in like extended universe concepts and stuff like that. If she ever appears in live action or in the new kind of Star Wars universe, it's because of this, stuff that was going around in George's head, when he was thinking about the sequels, right? There's a bunch of weird stuff about like the microscopic world and all that other stuff that I'm kind of glad we didn't get.
The Metachlorians?
Yeah. Well, there's this there's like this whole world about the wills, and like it's like it ties into the Metachlorians, which, by the way, this last recent episode of
Mandalorian?
A Mandalorian touches on them again, which I think is interesting. But I think a lot of that is just trying to like kind of piece together the kind of broken pieces that George kind of left lying around. But anyway, something interesting there. So moving on, we got some Marvel and DC stuff, and we'll get to the Jeremy. I know your favorite part of the episode was where we talked about the Snyder Cut. That'll be soon. WandaVision will premiere on Disney Plus on January 15th, making it the first time since 2009 that there has been no Marvel content in a year. There's just nothing released in 2020. First time since the original Iron Man film came out. And also breaking the promise that Disney said that WandaVision would come out in December. So a little bit of bullshit there. But it's January 15th, so it's not a big wait afterwards. There's going to be a lot of stuff on streaming, guys. There's going to be a lot of... this is... Once WandaVision hits, it's going to like be a... I wouldn't say deluge, but like there's going to be a lot of stuff hitting Disney Plus. And if you don't... And then might as well never mind talk about HBO Max, all that stuff that's coming to that. There's going to be a lot. And Netflix, obviously. So stay tuned for that. Apparently, Thor: Love and Thunder will feel like an Avengers sequel with the cast that they've kind of put together. Which, along with that news, we found out that Chris Pratt would be returning as Star-Lord in the film as well. And we saw that he's been working out. Chris Hemsworth has put on weight for Thor.
Good to know.
He looks ripped, like jacked.
Well, what's sweet is that they're filming this in Australia, so that's like pretty sweet for him.
And Well, him and for Taika, that's obviously really close to New Zealand where he's from. So I'm most interested about this movie because if it is Avengers kind of in scale, maybe not quite that big, but with that many characters, is how does Taika play with those characters, right? How does that fit into his kind of world? Thor Ragnarok is the most tonally different Marvel movie of all of them. It's not even close, in my opinion. It's definitely got some major similarities to the rest. It's close, but because they're all kind of homogenous, that one stands out for being the most different.
Sure. Fair enough.
So if you can kind of keep that up, that would be awesome. I'm just excited for more Taika stuff, and him getting to play with more toys is right up my alley.
So I guess what they're saying is it's going to be on the same scale as like Civil War, which is like a pseudo Avengers film, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's technically a Captain America movie, but it might as well be an Avengers film.
Well, and you've got to remember that Thor is basically one of the few kind of like original three, right?
That's
still remain, and Hemsworth has said, "Hey, I'm interested in staying around as long as they'll have me." So I think that's great. I mean, we all agree that Chris Hemsworth, I think, makes a great Thor, and we've seen his really amp up his comedy chops. We've seen him in a lot of different things. He's very funny. It's going to be nice to have him kind of as a through line as the kind of franchise grows. And maybe, honestly, guys, maybe 2020 having a year off from Marvel is the best thing that could have happened to the MCU. We talked about how we weren't excited about this phase, and now I'm kind of excited again. I don't know, Jeremy, what do you think?
Yeah, maybe a little bit more excitement than before, but like this movie in particular, I think it makes sense that the Guardians are going to be there for,
right?
I guess a little bit more than a cameo.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, like when is this? When is the expected release date of this one?
Well, let me quickly find that for you. While I'm looking that up, I'll also mention that Michael Giacchino is returning to score Spider-Man 3. Michael Giacchino, he did that really awesome strings version of the original Spider-Man theme for the original Far From Home or Home something. What was the original? Homecoming. Glad to see him back. He's actually been not doing, at one point, Giacchino was doing every movie, it seemed like. He was just scoring everything. He took a break. He did one of those same things that a couple of these big-time movie score people did. He did a live show where he went around. He I think he created his own music first of all. He made his own stuff, and then went out and did a live show, which is the same thing that what's his name did. Help me out.
Hans Zimmer.
Thank you. Which I would have loved to see. Apparently, it was crazy. It's a laser show. He plays all the instruments. It's really cool. You wouldn't think that
he doesn't play all. He himself plays all
not all of them, but he plays a guitar at certain parts. And he plays different instruments and stuff. It's pretty cool. It's weird to have famous composers still in 2020. It feels a little bit like we're still in the 1800s. Bit.
I mean, because you can create anything with a computer,
right? I guess, yeah.
It's not the same.
It's not the same.
Doesn't have the heart.
Movies have single-handedly kept classical music relevant in the modern era. 100%.
It really depends on how you mean.
I mean, I guess. I mean, I don't think people would be listening to new. First of all, not a lot of new symphonies being made anyway, just generally that aren't designed for film or television.
Sure.
So the fact that these are new musical ideas being created, despite that they're being used for film and television, right, which is a more exciting medium than just going to see the orchestra. But I, for one, am encouraged. I think it's a good thing. I've gone to see movie scores, TV scores at the orchestra because of that. I don't think that I could say the same. I would if it was just a Mozart show. I wouldn't be as excited for some reason.
Sure. I think that has less to do with movies and more to do with the music itself.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, let me just quickly answer your question, Jeremy. Expected release date is February 2022 for Thor: Love and Thunder. February 2022. We'll Lots of time. Lots of time. Okay. Deadpool 3 is back in the works. There's been big question marks about Disney. Deadpool 3 at Disney. Which is interesting. They're using the number 3. Who knows if that'll stick, but so far it looks like it'll continue the Deadpool that we already know. And the Bob's Burgers writers, sisters, Wendy Molyneux and Lizzie Molyneux Longland, are on set to write it. I think that's a great pick for writers. They are very clever, very smart people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
Bob's Burgers is an amazing show.
perfect
by the way.
tonal fit.
And all the weeks, like to announce this, they took an image of Bob's Burgers and then they stuck it like the katanas that he had on his back, and then that was what they tweeted out. That was the whole picture. It was pretty cool. I'm a fan.
Yeah, I'm into it.
Yeah. The whole movie's just gonna be them touching on the fact that they're now with Disney, right? That's just the whole thing.
Well, that'll certainly be a part of the movie. There's no way they're not gonna give away to it.
You can't not do it.
I hope it's not the entire movie, but it'll be featured within.
So if this is the first, I think, and this is maybe bigger news than we're giving it credit for. Is this technically the first X-Men movie that Disney is like we know is actively working on? Technically?
Not technically, because it's not X-Men movie.
Well,
it's a Deadpool movie.
Right.
He is on and off again, occasionally a member of the X-Men, but it's not the same.
I guess, but it's like it's hard to divorce Deadpool from the X-Men, and so much so that they included X-Men in all the Deadpool movies, right? Colossus was in both of them and stuff like that. I don't know how you have another Deadpool movie and then like just you not feature a single mutant, or you maybe bring in some kind of like C-tier mutants or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we know they are going to do X-Men.
Yeah, we do.
So, like, by the time Deadpool 3 is made, I'm sure Disney will have incorporated some of the mutants into the.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, and you could make the argument that we already had them, Wanda and Max and what's his brother's name, Pietro. I mean, they can easily retcon that, and it would be technically a retcon because I don't know how the rules for retconning work, but you could write in backstory for them having or being mutants without. And make it make sense is what I'm saying.
Well, it would just be the same technology. I believe it was Loki's scepter that triggered their powers or something like that, right?
Right.
Like, if I remember correctly, Baron Strucker was using it was some, or if not that, then it was the Tesseract or some sort of Chitauri technology that he was using that gave them their powers. So you could just have that same thing affect other people, and that creates mutants.
Yeah. Do you like the idea of mutants not being a natural occurring phenomenon? I kind of prefer that as their origin, and I think it works better as a analog to what the X-Men's always used for, often race relations or just bigotry in general.
Well, I think it would work better in that case if it were a natural occurring.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think that's what I'm saying.
Okay,
I think it works better in that way when it is natural occurring and not. And I'm still banking on Wanda creating the mutants.
Yeah.
I
remember saying that. Like we said that years ago.
Yeah.
That'd be sweet. Just a reversal of the no more mutants.
Yeah. That would be interesting. And then Marvel says that they have no intention of bringing back Iron Man from the dead, and promises not to use a digital double of Chadwick Boseman. So,
classy move.
One thing that they'll probably break, and a promise they'll probably break, and a promise they better not break. So, we shall see. I mean, maybe in 100 years in the future, when they can recreate any actor digitally, maybe then they'll bring Chadwick Boseman back. I don't know. Jeremy, what do you think of all this stuff?
What? Like
no? Just, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? Which stuff? Deadpool, the Iron Man stuff, or the Chadwick Boseman stuff? Any of it?
What? I mean, Chadwick Boseman. What are they supposed to do? Right? Like,
well, they're not gonna digital double him. I mean, that was I guess they could have done that as an option to try to make it make sense, but they're now saying that they're not going to do that.
Yeah, that's obviously for the best.
Right.
Deadpool 3. I mean, yeah, that's exciting. I don't know. Like,
all right. Well, Jeremy, how about this? We'll just talk about the stuff that you want to talk about, which is the Snyder Cut. Okay, and we can loop back on some of the other DC stuff.
There really isn't.
There really isn't. Sylvester Stallone will appear in the Suicide Squad. We don't know as who. And there's a trailer for Batman: Soul of the Dragon, which is a Bruce Timm Batman movie, which is also a 70s kung fu movie. So it's set in the 70s. It's gonna be wacky. It'll probably be pretty good. I'm looking forward to it. But let's talk about the Snyder Cut. We're literally putting Jeremy to sleep. So Snyder says that there will be these two stories back to back make me physically angry. I think Snyder says that there will be a 2 hours and 30 minutes of unseen footage in Justice League. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
Okay. Here's the next thing he said. Despite a 4-hour running time and what appears to be a blank check from HBO Max, this is by the way from Vanity Fair, Zack Snyder said that there will only be about 5 or 4 minutes of newly shot footage for his Snyder Cut Justice League.
Why does that make you angry?
Because they're spending $70 million to put 5 minutes of new footage. And why are we spending all this time talking about all these actors coming back for reshoots for 5 minutes of new footage?
It's all conflicting reports.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's your expectations on what all that means. What we do know is that they shot 5.5 hours worth of footage, and at some point they stopped working on over 2.5 hours of his footage and only dissected the other 2.5 hours and strip that down.
So
and
you're saying
this
is like a
we're getting 2.5 hours of new stuff because we've never seen it before, right?
Yeah,
and they're giving him all that footage back to work with,
right?
But he is essentially announcing, that he's only shooting with the actors that are coming back. As Miller says, he did a Zoom shoot while he was on set,
which is pretty cool.
They needed a couple pickup takes of that, so. And I think he mentioned it's being some sort of a montage type thing. So we're learning that we're not getting like a shit ton of new stuff that's new from 2020.
I guess
we were never supposed to, though.
I don't know. What's frustrating for me, I think, is that like all this news about, hey, we're bringing Jared Leto's Joker back, and he's gonna have a new look, and he's gonna look world weary, and also all these actors are coming back to record all this extra stuff. And it's like, oh, that's exciting, and then it's 5 minutes of new footage. Like, what the heck?
I guess it's fair to feel a little disappointed because that's all contributing to the hype train. But but the reality is, like Jeremy said, the footage isn't new to us. It's they've already shot most of it. They're just re-editing it. You got to remember, this is a director's cut of stuff that's already been filmed. It's not meant to be a new film.
Yeah, I think there's there's mixed messaging around this too. It's like, well, this is what it was originally intended. It's like, well, there was also new footage. Also, there's only 5 minutes of new footage. Also,
but again, that's also
there's a lot of stuff.
It's also coming from a lot of reports and blogs and headlines and whatnot. And then he does an interview with someone where they just ask him simple questions on, and we're getting it from the source, right?
He had an interview with
those conflict with everything everyone's been trying to say and where the money's going and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can lay the blame on necessarily him. I think it's just kind of everyone trying to pick apart what this thing is going to be exactly.
Well, I mean, I guess, but he's also contributing to that hype train, like Dan said. Like, he's the one putting out the pictures of all these actors and all that stuff. It's like he's saying one thing and then is also saying, by the way, that's only 5 minutes, so don't get your expectations up. It's like, well, you were the one who got our expectations up. He by the way, the interviewer that he had, the YouTuber he had an interview with was Grace Randolph, who, for my money, is I think a very interesting choice to conduct an interview with. She boasts a lot of like insider information that turns out to be wrong on a like highly regular basis, and
but I think there's a lot of people say the opposite too, right?
Yeah,
so I don't think it's fair to come down and say that you are she's got a pretty successful business, and
she definitely does.
Been right.
She's leveraged a lot of sensationalism to be very as successful as she is, and she calls out
that could be the case, but I don't know if it's fair to actually conclude that, because I don't know if you or I or Dan even knows that much about.
I don't know.
Well, I do know that, and I don't want to just just start punching down or whatever. I guess it's like can't punching down. She's much more successful than us, but like she's called out other people for calling out her scoops that turned out to be wrong. And it seems to happen on a fairly regular basis. It's not a great look, in my opinion.
Yeah, but we don't need to be a podcast that calls people out for calling other people out.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Okay. So, the other news that we got was that, like I said, the Joker is gonna have a new look and be road weary, whatever that means. We also got a new look at Steppenwolf. He released a kind of updated version or a look at his version of Steppenwolf. I can look it up here, so I can show you, Dan. But it's not that different than the Steppenwolf we got. I would argue
pretty different.
I mean,
pretty different looking.
I saw the side by side. I mean, they have the same. They look.
He also designed both of them.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like people got really excited about it. To me, it's not big enough of a difference.
I mean, it's immensely more threatening looking.
I think what's going to happen as we lead up to the Snyder Cut is this kind of stuff is going to happen more often. It is different, but not different enough. But people are going to be looking for the similarities, right? People are already looking to
that's
that reason.
And that's the discussion we've been having kind of with the two camps over this entire time, right? You see news break and you can immediately see Julian's reaction being on one side of the camp and then my reaction being on the other side of the camp, right? And it always just looks like one side tries to spin it negatively and the other tries to spin it positively, me being the positive, Julian being the negative.
Sure.
I'm not trying to spin
I'm
it
just
negative.
Here just trying to keep this podcast.
I think it naturally just that's where your brain kind of leads to on what as this information is rolling out. You're more on the skeptical side of things.
Well, I don't want to just take it at face value. That's what I guess exactly right. I'm a little bit more skeptical of some of this of this hype that's constantly being generated on this movie and it or whatever it is, movie, show, combination of thereof. And I just want to not just kind of just regurgitate or repeat everything that's coming out of Zack Snyder's mouth without kind of questioning it and saying, does that make sense or, is that earned or, whatever it might be. I just trying to give an opposite perspective or maybe not opposite, but a challenge your perspective a little bit, Jeremy. That's all. But yeah, there's certainly, and it's certainly happening a lot on the internet too. So that's the old one and that's the new one.
That's not the new images though.
Well, I mean, there's one specific one. I don't know why I can't find it here.
We can do this afterwards.
Anyway.
They can't see it.
Right. Yeah, you can look it up. You could Google it. Apparently,
the point is that it's clearly different. And I think with the original voice actor and his intent and what he thought he was doing, I just feel like these scenes, specifically the Steppenwolf versus the Amazons, is just going to hit a lot differently. In a better way.
The hope is though, like for me at least, having looked at those images, it looks like, based on the fact that they're images, it's just an aesthetic difference so far. Being that it's just a new cut, a lot of it new edits and such. I hope that that's not the entirety of the movie. Obviously, there's 2.5 hours of stuff that they filmed, so there's.
Well, apparently he filmed 4 hours of stuff, and then
5. Well, his assembly, like the raw footage he has, is 5.5 hours worth.
Yeah.
His plan at one point, so he was like, there are going to be 2 movies, and then when they remember this, where there was going to be part 1 and part 2, and you got really upset about that. Yep, probably. You got really upset about the title of part 1 and part 2.
And then Marvel did it with.
Exactly.
Hated it then too.
But they then changed their mind and said we're going to do 1 movie, and then Snyder was like, well, he has all this footage, like 4 hours. His plan was to make basically half a movie and like present that to Warner Brothers and say, we should make, like, basically ask for forgiveness and say we should really make this into 2 movies. Yeah. That obviously didn't end up happening, but I think that's interesting. He also goes on to say that his ideal version of the movie would be a black and white IMAX cut, which I think is surprising because for a comic book movie, I think you want the color. I think, yes, there's lots of black and white comic books out there, but I don't think you gain anything from making a movie that was shot for color, just desaturating it all the way to black and white. I don't think that makes it better. I mean, obviously it's his movie, but like he also then followed it up by releasing a new cut of the Hallelujah trailer that had a couple new scenes in it, in black and white.
Oh yeah,
and I would say it's a little muddled in black and white. Some of the photography doesn't. When you think of a black and white movie and things that were filmed for black and white specifically, they do spend a lot of time thinking about contrast and like all that kind of stuff. When a movie's filmed for color, that's not as thought about as often, and it kind of comes through that in this desaturated version of the trailer. At least Jeremy, I we'll get your opinion right after, but to me, it looked a little bit more muddied. Like it was like harder to tell what was going on, which I don't think is what you want. I think black and white's idea is to try to like take the color out so you really think about the characters and you really think like you're not being distracted.
Right.
But I don't know if that's what came through in the final product of that trailer. Jeremy, have you seen the black and white version?
Yeah, I don't think anyone would prefer a black and white
except for Snyder
version. I know that when he was working on his cut, he would show it in black and white to some of the actors who wanted to see it or some higher ups, and I think that was in due to the fact in terms of unfinished CG,
and not
so it gives it kind of
a
basic kind of look and doesn't make it look very spotty. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's too early to tell like what black and white could do for something like this. I don't know.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
ultimately, I think what will probably end up happening is that we'll get a special feature version of it that you can watch in black and white, kind of like the black and chrome edition of Fury Road, in which is like, in which case, watch it if you want to, but probably the ideal version is the colored version.
Right.
And then blah 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 blah. I think that's it. I think the one thing you mentioned earlier, Jeremy, is Ezra Miller's thing, but he filmed that new Flash stuff on the set of Fantastic Beasts 3. So the second reference to that movie today.
Wow.
And the crew of Fantastic Beasts 3 took direction from Snyder over Zoom, which I think is really a crazy thing, like a weird way to make a movie, but pretty cool, I think, actually. I feel like that would be like really hard to do.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. Like unless your webcam is the same as your camera.
I think they probably would have probably tapped into the what's it called? There's a word for it, but basically the monitor. It's called the monitor. That's what it's called. The monitor. So you could probably export that out into Zoom or something. I don't know. Okay. So I have an agree or disagree segment for you guys, and this one, unlike most of our agree or disagree segments, much lighter, I think. A little bit more breezy.
Okay, let's do it.
So, a tweet from Mike Birbiglia.
Mike Birbiglia.
Mike Birbiglia. Thank you, Daniel. Comedian, podcaster. Okay.
He's a pretty funny comedian, actually. You guys should check him out.
Okay.
He's awesome.
Anyway, his tweet was, "Dear streaming platforms, please play the credits. They're part of the movies. You should know this. Your company acquires the rights to movies. Don't you like movies? Sincerely, people who like movies." And then he followed that tweet up with saying, "I was just talking to one of my favorite directors, Adam Leone, who pointed out that the credits on streaming platforms could easily be an opt-out instead of an opt-in. Anyway, that's it. For my money, that's the best solution." That's the tweet. There is another part to it, though.
Okay.
A particular director that Dan may or may not have strong feelings about.
Now I can't look at the
tweeted, even and replying or like retweeted and added, "Even beyond the respect for the folks who worked on it, the credits are the cool down coming out of an ending. They're part of the movie, and this shit with cutting them off or popping a 'you might also like this' has to stop." So just really adding on to it, but someone who from Hollywood had an opinion on that. So my question for you guys is, when it comes to credits on streaming services, or just generally, do you agree with this take that there should be an opt-out of credits, or that they should be played regardless, and that those what you might like should come after? Where do you guys fall on this kind of idea?
Jeremy, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I think as long as the option is there, I don't see anything wrong with it. Just as long as they don't remove it completely, I think it makes sense to show all the names and everyone involved in creating what you just witnessed. I don't think you necessarily need to force people to go through it. But yeah, as long as the option is there, but you always have the option, right? You can just press next or skip. Or...
Well, I think the argument is that they're too quick to pop up the what do you want to watch next stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that, because sometimes I want to watch the credits, and I can't get to the remote fast enough to stop it from playing the next thing. And that especially
doesn't
on Netflix.
happen very often, but it does happen.
Yeah.
There are certain movies that when it ends, it cuts to black, and you need that denouement. You need to just sit and listen to the music.
That's what
and
they're
think
saying.
About what you just
it's
saw.
the calm down. Yeah.
So I agree with Jeremy, and I think as long as you give the consumer a choice, who cares, right?
Well, there's technically a choice now. I think the argument is the choice is the way that they're presenting this choice now the best way to do it.
And I think that like you said, the watch next comes up too early. Right. The reality is people can pause and stop a movie and quit whenever they want. So why force it?
Yeah, I suppose. But I think.
But Netflix has different priorities, right?
Right. They wanted you to keep watching.
They want people just eyes glued to the screen.
I have a great example of this, actually. I was watching a new show that I think is really, very funny, Auntie Donna's Big Old House of Fun on Netflix. And their credits music is really, really good. And it's actually part of the episode. It's like a song that talks about the episode.
Right.
And it's hilarious. And I missed it multiple times. I didn't know until like multiple episodes in, because I wanted to listen to, like, the music was catchy. I was like, oh, I want to listen to that.
Yeah.
And then I found out, I was like, wait a minute. That's great, and I missed it on the last couple episodes. I didn't go back and watch them yet. I probably will, but it's just like, or maybe I don't know if you can do this because it's really hard. It's the same kind of problem that you had for movies for television. It's like you can't go back to the original creator and say, what do you want? You know, like, do you want us to move? Like, when do you want that to come in? Where do you want the next up thing? Halfway through the credits? After the credits? Right away? You know, if you're working for Netflix, maybe you get to have that say if you're making a movie for them. But like David Fincher, perhaps.
Yeah, hopefully.
But most cases, it's not. I come down on this on the side of you guys basically saying it should be available for sure. I like the idea of the opt out idea. So it's like it's gonna play the credits for everybody, and if you don't want that, you can go into your settings and change it, which I think is the best of both worlds because that lets people who don't care, kind of.
Well, I think part of to read into that quote though, one of the things that they're worried about is that there are so many people who don't care about credits, right? And they want people to be recognized for their work. Well,
and no one will. That's a great point. No one will give a shit about credits if no one ever watches them. So,
but I think it's tough because I don't know that there are a lot of people that care about the credits that really care about the credits now.
That might be true, and maybe that's, I don't know. I don't really. Here's the thing: I don't really care if you, as a regular film goer, don't care about the credits, right? If you get up as soon as the movie ends and leave, that's all the power to you. That is your right to choose that.
Sure.
But what Netflix is doing is not really even giving people really that choice, or it's presenting the opposite choice too quickly. Let people think about it. Maybe more people will come around to watching credits if you actually give them the opportunity to do so, and you're not really doing that. So I think that's kind of the part of the problem there. But ultimately, it's not a big deal either way. This is what I mean. It's like pretty light and fluffy kind of stuff. But I'm pro watch the credits. I like it. Obviously, we've been kind of trained a little bit too with the post-credit stingers, and like some of the Marvel movies have really gorgeous credit sequences before like the black bars start rolling up. But and I don't know. I don't know how they do it on Disney Plus. But like, do you think they wait for that whole credit sequence to go by before they present you the what do you want to watch next idea? I don't know.
There's an easy way to find out.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I don't know. Okay. So that's agree or disagree. Still don't have a jingle for that. Still don't have a jingle for that. Okay, moving on to television, and this I will use as kind of a bridge between film and television. Not a lot here. Terrence Winter, producer of The Sopranos, has exited as showrunner of the HBO Max The Batman spinoff, the GCPD series, due to creative differences with Matt Reeves and other producers' visions. A little disappointing. Obviously, huge name to lose for a project like that. But interesting that he's clashing with Reeves' vision. So it's like, if this is going to be a spinoff of his movie, then I think he probably should get final say on that anyway, you know?
It's probably not limited to the two of them, but...
Well, probably not. I mean, it's hard to... We never know. We'll never know.
It's so difficult to discuss the concept of creative differences because it's such a broad, like, vague thing to say.
Well, and it's often used as...
anything.
It could often be used as cover. It could be anything else, yeah. But just the news that he's leaving that show sucks. Who knows? I mean, maybe Matt Reeves, when he's done making the movie, will be like, hey, I'll come on and produce it or something. Who knows? Yeah. I don't know. Jeremy, does that bug you at all? I mean, it bugs me, but...
yeah, a little bit. But like you said, it could be a cover, we have no idea, really.
For the record, I'm not saying it's a cover.
I'm
not saying that. I'm just saying that term is used a lot to when people leave projects.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Netflix. Okay, I actually really like this story, and I've been moving it from show notes to show notes because we haven't touched on it.
Okay.
And I think this is really interesting. It's basically the dawning of a new medium, or not really, but it's kind of. Okay, Netflix is in the process of testing an audio-only feature to compete with podcasts. David Goyer is developing a scripted Batman podcast, and this is just as an aside. I've included it here because it was a different story, but I thought it matched. David Goyer is creating a Batman podcast exclusively for Spotify, set to release in 2021. it will apparently feature Batman's more nightmarish villains, which is weird because if they're nightmarish, you think you'd want to see them on screen, but maybe it's easier to describe.
No. You want it in people's heads. You want them to create their own nightmares.
Okay. Well, that's right. We all want to create nightmares. I think this idea of a new medium of like scripted storytelling, it's basically back to radio plays.
Yeah, so it's hardly a new.
It's not a new medium, but it's like a reinvention of that same medium. It's taking what podcasts are doing, right, which is becoming obviously a huge industry, and then it's taking what like these streaming services are doing, and kind of ultimate desaturation and taking it all the way back to just audio. I think it's a really like. I don't know if a brilliant concept, but it's a really interesting concept to me. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, audiobooks have been a thing for a while, but this is creating content specifically for an audiobook rather than adapting a book into an audiobook.
Right.
So, yeah, it's interesting. I'm into it, honestly. I think they exist. There are already scripted podcasts out there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There absolutely is. And I'm not saying they're reinventing the wheel here, but I think seeing like players like Netflix or DC get involved, I think is interesting. So for the record, it's not entirely new. Marvel did a scripted podcast for Wolverine a couple of years back, which I never ended up finishing. It's something about like 1,000 Ways to Die in Alaska or something like that. Right. I think it's called. And it's interesting. And there's also a Halo one. I really liked the Halo. They did a Halo scripted podcast leading into Halo 4, I want to say. That was really fascinating. I think it's a great idea. And if you like, especially if it's episodic and you're releasing it in that way, you're going to make money hand over fist, in my opinion. I think we all know people listen to podcasts more and more all the time. Jeremy, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I think it's amazing news. I mean, I've tried to dabble in whatever fan-made type podcasts are out there where they incorporate like a storyline from a comic or whatever. And like, they're pretty cool, but like obviously low budget, and they can include like a lot of the bells and whistles that like these companies can to really make a quality product utilizing
like actors,
licensed actors, like really good voice actors, licensed music, and just really make it something that someone's going to want to download every week and tune into.
I mean, it's maybe a little weird that Netflix is kind of deciding to get into this game. It's like Spotify is kind of already, and this is the thing, like maybe it's good because Spotify kind of corners that market right now. They're paying a lot of money for podcasts. I mean, I don't know how much money they gave Rogan. It was insane. It was like $1 billion to move his podcast exclusively to Spotify. It was insane.
I don't think it was that much.
I don't know.
I thought it was only like 100 million.
Even if it was 100 million, that's a lot of money in my mind. But like, could you imagine having like a Netflix app that you're just like you'd pop open for podcasts? I guess.
I think that's what Netflix wants, right?
I mean, more usage. I get the more you're on their platform.
That's what these apps are all about,
right? And
then there's the background streaming that's like a term now, right? That everyone's kind of guilty of because they're already paying attention to their cell phone screen. So it's like almost like a cheaper way to have your app open, but not having to have like visual stuff there to stream.
Yeah, it's like descriptive audio, right? Yeah. Scriptive audio, which is a thing that, by the way, I found out about recently for the first time. I didn't know was like a thing, which is basically like an audio track that describes the scene that you're watching, which is crazy. It makes perfect sense. I mean, for obviously the visually impaired, but I didn't know it existed. So, and it comes up actually because of this week's episode of Mandalorian. I found out about it, and we'll talk about it in the podcast tomorrow. There's any comments specifically about this Goyer developed Batman podcast? This idea of dealing with more nightmarish villains is interesting. David Goyer writing it is also interesting. Been involved with DC for a long time.
Sure.
Going to Spotify though, which I guess like maybe Netflix is just a little bit more advanced at this, and HBO Max doesn't even have 4K yet, so you know they're not ready to jump into the podcast world. But is that something you'd listen to?
Potentially, yeah. I think it's interesting because with the nightmarish thing, like it's going to deal with the more psychological enemies that Batman has, which is always where I tend to. Those are the stories that I prefer.
Dr. Pig?
Maybe not Pig.
I don't think Dr.
I'm
Pig?
thinking like Scarecrow, Mad Hatter.
Okay.
Hugo Strange potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that aspect of it. But
Professor Pig. Fuck. Yeah. So stupid.
It's always alliteration.
It's obviously Professor Pig. I like that Professor Pig pops up more often than you'd think. and is sometimes really creepy and scary, but is often played for a joke.
Yeah.
But, the other thing this reminds me of the other thing, which is that Sandman was being converted. I don't know if we talked about it on the show, but Sandman was being converted into an audiobook or not, like an audio play, which is
that's impossible. I'm sorry, I'm saying it now. That's impossible.
And who's the writer? It's Neil Gaiman.
Yeah,
he's closely tied to the project. Like it's
I wish them, the best, but that's insane. Like that comic book is so the visuals are so important. I can't imagine.
I don't know. Maybe that's the whole point, because you can't imagine it. That's like, ooh.
And fair enough. And it's Neil Gaiman's involved, and he'll use very descriptive language, and maybe they can make it work. But that's a very tall order.
Right. Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to mention with Netflix before we moved on to something else was that they're testing a scheduled programming TV channel feature, which is something we talked about on the podcast. Like, I swear to God, last episode.
I think so.
And all I'm saying is it's a genius idea. It's an absolute genius idea. I don't know. You're seeming a little bit against it for some reason.
I'm not against it. It's just it's been a thing already. It's not surprising. It's not novel to me.
For whatever reason, it does feel novel. It feels like the perfect marriage of the streaming content world and like the broadcast media world with this idea of like joint viewing. We all were watching the same thing at the same time is an interesting thing. It's why people like live tweeting the Oscars and stuff like and the Super Bowl and stuff like that. We're all watching the same thing at the same time. There's a zeitgeist moment. If you can, and Game of Thrones, by the way, had the same thing.
Sure, yeah.
If you can recreate that with streaming shows, which is really hard because everyone's watching them at whatever fucking time that they want, I think that's a net positive for streaming content. I don't think it makes it worse in any way. I don't know. Do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, and I think we talked about it on the last podcast. But what I said was that it's a regression. Like, it's just going back to essentially cable TV. You have a scheduled time that you have to be.
Well, you don't have to though. It's just an option
if you want to be part of that whole thing. Right. So it's fine. It has convenience factors in some cases for those things. But it comes with all the same problems that cable had.
If they bring commercials back though, garbage. It's garbage if they bring commercials back because we're paying for the service, so fuck you.
Crave asked me that the other day. I did a survey.
Like, would you be okay if
they asked like what level of advertising you'd be comfortable with, and I was like
zero.
I'm paying you.
You back? You're paying Crave again?
Yeah. I am. I wanted to watch last week tonight.
That's fair. And I think you're gonna see. I think a lot of HBO Max content is gonna end up on Crave in Canada.
So yeah.
I would just rather have HBO Max personally, instead of paying Bell. But, Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on this? I know, again, we touched on it last week, but this is kind of confirmation that there's something they're looking at.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It allows people to tune into something that they're not really wanting to commit to something, or they don't know what to watch. Like, I see a lot of people always asking on Twitter, like, what should I watch, or whatever,
mm-hmm.
right? Like,
right.
I feel like it helps those types of people out if you can kind of just narrow it down to
like just turn on the Netflix channel and just watch whatever's on.
And I think from Netflix perspective, it helps with keeping people on the app.
Yeah.
It's going to be that background noise.
It would help me. Honestly, it would help me.
I think people are going to keep it on for hours at a time, not pay attention to what's on the TV, just have it in the background.
Again, I mean, maybe that's a net negative. I don't know. That's maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, people were already watching a lot of TV. I don't know if that's going to make it any worse. Jason Telford, longtime friend of the show, Jason Telford. Thank you for watching. We missed this question from earlier. He asks, is the 4-year Netflix deal for Fincher exclusively for films? Given the Fincher quote about Mindhunter not getting enough views to justify the cost, it's interesting he would want to do a series. I think that's a great question, mm-hmm. Jason. It's not clear. We don't know. We don't really know the details here. My guess, it's basically whatever the fuck he wants to do.
Yeah.
Which apparently is not Mindhunter season 4 or whatever. So
I imagine it'll be a good mix of both.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that we've seen Fincher do on television is often just like the first couple episodes of something, kind of set the tone. The House of Cards example, right? But then this year we saw Ridley Scott come to HBO Max and do Raised by Wolves. He did the whole thing. Yeah. It's not a great show.
It's a weird
show. I mean, it's got some really great moments in it. But what's notable about it is the fact that the director of Alien and all this other stuff came to television to do this show, right? And the lines between movies and TV are more and more blurred all the time. Just ask Zack Snyder, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if he did a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But it seems to me like his passion's more on the film side, kind of telling a concise story, and then it's all his vision. So I wouldn't be surprised if it leans more towards film.
Certainly.
Yeah. Although he talks about that, I think he said series when he talked about that cancel culture idea. So who knows?
Yeah, something like that I think would make more sense as a series. Like there's just so much
too
unpack.
much.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of streaming services, that's what all the TV section is. I just should rename it streaming. HBO has given a series order to The Last of Us. We knew that they were working on it, but this is official, so it will be made.
Sure.
And the Chernobyl creator Craig Mazin will be involved as the showrunner, I believe, along with Neil Druckmann. So great news, I think, on that. I feel like in the Last of Us community, a little bit of like, hey, we don't need a show. We already have this great game,
right.
Which is interesting kind of take. Jeremy, where do you land on that?
Yeah, I think that's generally the opinion, but with Neil Druckmann being like heavily involved here, and I think even Evan Wells, who was like the studio owner of the Naughty Dog, he's like a co-producer. So I just feel like with all the people who are involved in the original games, they're going to be here like hand in hand with Mazin, basically making this thing. So I'm actually curious to see how it's going to pan out.
Yeah, and you got a lot of the actors from Last of Us kind of chiming in every once in a while. Who plays Joel? It's what the heck is his name?
Troy Baker.
Troy Baker. Basically said he would love to be on the show as long as he's not playing Joel. was his exact quote, which I think is great. There's that for a long time people were like Macy Williams should be in there. Like I think she might have aged out of that a little bit, but I mean, I would almost prefer a not well-known actress in that role. In my opinion, I don't know. We're going to start seeing a lot of casting stuff and a lot of like that kind of thing popping up soon. Are you guys just kind of tune out and just like, hey, whenever it's done, let me know? Or
more or less, yeah. That's my plan with most things. I feel like I would prefer it. This it's weird. This is one example. I feel like I'd prefer it as a film than a series. Last of Us.
Why?
I don't want them to flesh it out more than the games did. You know, I think with a show, you kind of have to. Like, they're going to get more into certain characters you do want to see.
You think it's more world building?
More world building. They're going to create their own characters, and those characters are going to have, B and C stories within episodes. Like, I don't want to see them get away too much. This is one property where I want them to really just adapt the original narrative.
And that's, I think, where people come down and be like, I don't need that. I already have the game. I can go back and do that.
You need it or don't need it. I'm saying I think that's how I want to see this presented. You know, I don't want to see effectively, I'm using, extreme language here, but a bastardized version of The Last of Us, right?
Right. I mean, I think with the original creators involved, I don't know if you necessarily are going to get that.
But that's why they have the original creators involved, right? Because it would be easy enough to adapt it. You bring the original creators on so that they can bring whatever their new ideas are into the fold and make it all make sense as a cohesive whole. I don't know if that's necessarily a great idea. I don't want the episode 6 or 7 within the series that's always like kind of the lull where they explore some character you probably don't really care about.
That's when they're hunting for that deer in the winter. That's that episode.
Yeah, but I think it's it's gonna be on HBO. And I think with Neil Druckmann involved, especially in the writing room, just kind of creating this whole thing, he's always been about defining expectations. So I think they know what expectations are. They know some fans don't want a direct translation. They know some fans want it to be different. So I just think that they're going to give us something pretty surprisingly enjoyable here, or with kind of a different take, but making it like this HBO quality. You kind of live here for 10 hours. So to me, that's more exciting than getting a direct translation that's just an hour or 2 hours or whatever, because then I'd be like, well, I don't need that because I have the game. What in that 2 hours are you going to give me that's new? Probably not very much, right? It'd be a streamlined version of the game. So I'm interested just kind of living in that world and seeing what characters they bring in.
Dan, it's curious that you seem like someone who would enjoy more world building in something like The Last of Us, but you're worried that creates problems? I'm
worried that serializing it will create problems. But you're right, Jeremy. Like, it's on HBO. That's a good sign. You have the original creators involved. That's a very good sign. What I'm saying is I want it to be more Watchmen and less Walking Dead. I wouldn't want them to create a series out of Last of Us and have it evolve into Walking Dead, where they have to create even having like an Infected of the Week.
I think I think The Walking Dead has other problems, which is the fact that they have no end to their story. Admittedly, no end to their story. So I think that it's in itself its own problem. This has we know there's a finite. If they're adapting the game, there's a beginning, middle, and end, at least to what we've seen so far.
Yes.
So that I think it helps give it a little bit more structure.
If they're adapting the game.
Which I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. It'll be, I think, there's two options, or I guess maybe three. It's a direct adaptation of the games as a series. Okay, that's option one. Option two is it's a completely new story set in the same world.
Right.
Option three is it's kind of like a blending of those two things.
Which is what it's going to end up being.
Right.
It's number three every time.
And what do you mean by like a blending? So there's new characters and new stories at the same time as the stories that we know? It seems to me like maybe you could do this interesting thing, especially with the original creators involved, where you kind of can remix a little bit of your story. I'm the creator of the story. I can then go back and it's like I'm gonna have a new chance to retell it in a new way. Right. I can think, I wish I'd done that, or there's a little bit of the risk of the George Lucas effect of it, where it's like, hey, best not to go back and retouch it or redo the thing that you already know worked. Mm-hmm. It'll likely come out worse, But there's also the chance that it could be like really brilliant television, because it is a little bit different because you're converting it from one medium to another.
Sure.
One with a lot of information, like video games can be hundreds of hours long, right? Containing tons of information. It's a little bit closer because Naughty Dog is very cinematic in the way they tell their stories. But in a film version of The Last of Us, you could condense it down, and then you'd be removing information, right, to tell that story, because you couldn't tell it in a movie length. Yeah. In this, you could get all the same things, and you kind of have the same freedom to tell as much or little of the story of the world as you want. I don't know. I think it's fascinating. Okay. CW's Black Lightning will come to an end after its 4th season, which is coming. This one's interesting. After 10 years on TBS, Conan O'Brien's late night show will come to an end in June. He will be then hosting a weekly variety show on HBO Max. His quote is, I love this. In 1993, Johnny Carson gave me the best advice of my career. As soon as possible, get to a streaming platform. I'm thrilled that I get to continue doing whatever the hell it is I do on HBO Max, and I look forward to a free subscription. Classic Conan. That's awesome. That's good stuff. I mean, it seems like if you're doing a weekly variety show, do you feel like that it's gonna, like the HBO's This Week Tonight
last week tonight
overlaps? Like, is there a little bit of too much of the same thing going on there?
But they're completely different styles. Like I think they're for completely different people in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, I know people love Conan. I've seen Conan.
He's going to be much less political.
Probably. I don't know. I don't watch. This is part of the problem. Probably no one watches TBS anymore.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know how many people are watching Conan. But I like Conan. I don't know if this is something I'll be tuning into. It's just the late night format is, I think, a little played out in my mind.
Sure.
But maybe this gives them opportunity to reinvent it a little bit.
Well, and it's already been reinvented, right? Like Last Week Tonight's a good example of a non-traditional late night show.
Right.
Same with Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj.
Didn't that get canceled? Did it? I think I got canceled.
Damn it! That was a good example,
though. Jeremy, do you have any relationship to Conan, or is this exciting to you in any way?
Yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of late night shows in general. Back in the day with Leno and Letterman, like I was basically tuning in as much as I could. And with Conan too, I thought he was definitely one of my favorites. So I just think it's cool if you're on that app, you have the option to kind of tune into something like that. Like that content's going to be there. So and only there. So I think it's a good idea.
HBO Max is doing a really good job of like very quickly catching up in terms of content. I think you talk about all these streaming services. It's like, and Disney Plus, you know what? It did not have a lot of content when it launched. It was pretty barren.
It was not a lot of new content. It was a ton of content. It
launched with Mandalorian, and then it had all of it. I get there was a lot of old stuff on there, but there was not a lot of new stuff. And like unless you were really excited about going back and watching Disney's Robin Hood again, there wasn't a lot to bring you in other than the Mandalorian. And this is like HBO Max is like, well, we're doing so much stuff. Like, I feel like, again, the Ridley Scott show, Raised by Wolves, is a great example of like it came out of nowhere. But that's like that's a prestige show on HBO Max that just dropped out of nowhere. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's very impressive, I think, how quickly they're kind of, like I said, catching up. Speaking of Disney Plus, Darkwing Duck may be getting a reboot at Disney Plus with Seth Rogen producing.
Finally.
Right?
After all these years. I have so many questions, so many unanswered questions.
Right. Let's get dangerous. I want to find out what's going on. Maybe it's a gritty reboot. That would be fun.
That would be appropriate.
Sorry, say that again, Jeremy?
Barney reboot.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Just right next to the Barney reboot.
God, that was a whole other level, that one.
That one make you physically angry?
That one was upsetting, yeah.
Yeah. The reboot of what's it called? What's the other duck show? Not Darkwing Duck. DuckTales. Has been apparently very successful, so this would presumably be like a spin-off of that, probably. Space Force is renewed for season 2 at Netflix. Mixed reviews for season 1. I didn't watch it.
I watched all of it.
And?
Yeah, mixed reviews.
Right, okay.
It's got some great moments. There's a lot of very funny moments and very funny people obviously involved in the show, but then just in between those moments, it's a little bland.
Right, okay. My understanding is that the writer or the creator, the showrunner of Space Force has a hard time with like his first seasons, and that they get much better as the shows goes on, as his shows go on. So
I'll tell you, similar to Community, like Community is my favorite comedy of all time.
Comedy or sitcom?
TV series.
It's your
favorite
favorite
comedy series.
Comedy series of all time. That's
yeah.
Okay. It's definitely my favorite sitcom. I don't know if anyway.
But I will admit that not every episode is great, right? There's some really great episodes and then some that are kind of not so great. I would say the same about Space Force in terms of the moments. Like there's some like amazing, laugh out loud, like I couldn't breathe, hilarious moments, but then in between a lot of nothing.
Right. Okay. Mixed reviews. Showtime has decided to. First of all, when was the last time anyone's talked about Showtime? That's the first question. Second of all, we haven't talked about the Halo live-action series that's coming to Showtime in forever, right? Still in development, turns out. And they've decided to recast Cortana. And I think they made the right choice here. So they decided that they're going to cast the original voice actor, Jen Taylor, to play and voice the CG character of Cortana.
Only makes sense.
Which it's the fact that this had to be.
Does she have the same voice? Yes. Okay, she's hired.
Yeah, I don't understand why that was even a question. Apparently, their idea was the original actor Natasha McElhorn, who was cast for the role originally, was going to play Cortana as well as Dr. Catherine Halsey. So I guess the idea was like maybe she created an AI after her own image or something. Yeah. But they decided no, we should probably just stick to what people know. I wonder if they made stuff and then like it didn't feel right or didn't sound right, and they had to go back and bring her in, because it feels like, again, they must be actively working on the show, right? Like, I don't know. I'm very stoked to see a live action Halo series. Yeah. Like, super excited. I think it's a really interesting world that has not been touched on enough in other mediums that we've seen. Like, there's been other little mini Halo things over time, and like it all started with those live action commercials in the first place. But this is fascinating, and the guy we know who's playing Master Chief is that really tall dude from American Gods. Played the
his name is Pablo something.
Yeah, great actor. So I mean, like, this seems to me like they've kind of like, okay, we might have overstepped our ideas a little bit here. Let's kind of bring things back to what people know of the series. But I mean, it's too early to say. But glad to hear that. That
Pablo Schreiber. Schreiber, I think. Yeah, it's like a Germanish name.
Okay, that's it for television. Quick, what we've been watching. Dan, have you been watching anything interesting lately?
Again, nothing for the podcast.
Nothing for the podcast.
I'm reading more than watching anything nowadays.
Okay, well,
and it's not books that are. Like,
right.
It's not the same.
It's a bit the dictionary. My recommendation.
I'm reading a book on totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. Like, we're not going to talk about that on this podcast.
No, that doesn't sound like a fun time. Jeremy, have you been watching anything or playing anything even recently?
No.
What you just been working?
Basically.
Okay. Well, I have been watching stuff. Unlike the rest of my co-hosts, I watched Auntie Donna's Big Old House of Fun, like I said earlier about the trailer thing. It is fucking hilarious, guys. It's very funny. It's insane. we were talking briefly when we were playing Call of Duty yesterday, and it reminds me a little bit of the zaniness of things like Rick and Morty, but it's in live action. But it seems to get away with the things that cartoons are able to get away with, but somehow still in live action. It's tonally shifts like within skits sometimes.
I gotta watch this thing. I have no idea how to imagine.
It's hard to describe, Dan. I struggle with. I've been thinking about this since I watched it, how to describe the show, and I don't really know how. It's got a through line of these three main characters, right? And each episode follows a narrative. But it's the loosest narrative you could possibly imagine. The example I used yesterday was that there's an episode where they find out that the Queen of England is coming for dinner. Okay?
Sure.
So they're wacky concepts to begin with. But the first thing that they have to do is that they need to figure out where they can get music. So they go to get a jukebox.
Okay.
And the jukebox is a person pretending to be a jukebox.
Okay, and I feel like it's the kind of show when you try to explain it.
It's really hard. I'm not exactly. It's hard to explain. It's almost impossible to explain. But that joke wraps around and comes back again at the end of the episode when the Queen actually does arrive. So it's like, it's insane. I would also recommend, if you can watch it high, definitely watch it high, because it's I think rewards that kind of like these ideas, like jumping between skits. It feels good. And then the one thing they do that's really clever is that each skit blends into the next in pretty, like, again, weird ways, but like they don't just stop and go to the next thing. Mm-hmm. There is sometimes where it looks like they're watching something on television and they like pull back, and it's like the weird crazy shit you were seeing was a television thing. But it doesn't happen very often. This is something that's just pure hilarity. I was dying laughing. Dying. And I can't really describe it, so just give it a shot. It's pretty short too. Like each episode's only like 20 minutes, and there's only like 5. So, again, I'll repeat, the trailer music is fucking hilarious also. So,
all right,
there you go. That's my review. And then I also been watching Star Trek Discovery season 3. I haven't talked about it. I'm not going to really dive into it here, but I think it's really, really good Star Trek. If you're looking for new Star Trek stuff, we just had the Lower Deck series, which is also really great. This is back to live action, and I think they've kind of found their footing. For those who are interested, the season 3 is them in the future now, further into the distance than we have anywhere else in the Star Trek universe, and it's given them some freedom that the show hasn't had. Yeah. And I think it's really been to the show's benefit. So if you're looking for good Star Trek, there's a lot available right now, and I would say that season 3 of Star Trek is up there with some of the best, for sure, of the series, but also a couple episodes, choice ones. Episode 4, I want to say, is one of the best Star Trek episodes I've ever seen. So that's my recommendations for what I've been watching. So, and that is also obviously The Mandalorian, which we've been watching and reviewing. So please tune into those as well. Okay, that does it for this episode of the Tower Babble podcast. This was episode 158, for those who've been keeping track at home. We are well over 300 or something actual recorded episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Easily. But count numbered episodes, 158. Apps and yeah, so please, I'm like off camera here. I'm gonna slide back. Follow us on Twitter at Tower Babblecast, Facebook.com/Tower Babblecast, and head over to our website, towerbabble.ca, to find everything we do and help support the show at patreon.com/Tower Babblecast. And we'll be back with, like I said, the Mandalorian review as early as we're recording tomorrow live, Sunday, and dropping Monday. This episode should drop afterwards, probably, so that doesn't really help you. That's in the past. You can go find it. It'll be in the feed already. We'll talk to you then.